All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Division 17's first ever webinar session. Happily, we are focusing on important student concern, that is, of course, internship applications. I am Marie Miville, and I'm the Vice President for Education and Training of Division 17, and it is my pleasure to serve as this evening's moderator. I do want to let you all know that this session is being recorded because there are a lot of students that were interested in hearing the information but weren't able to be here. But I do want to let you know that this is going to be recorded and kept. So as many of you online are aware, most internship application deadlines are now passed. And so we're going to focus on all the events that happen that will unfold from here on out. So as you see on the visual below here, this is going to be our agenda for today. And you know, we consulted with both faculty as well as students in terms of coming up with topics for today. So we're looking at, of course, interviewing, which is the next big step for all of you, final decisions and ranking, transitioning to the intern role, and postdoc and faculty position applications. That is really zooming far ahead for you. But just so you know that the light at the end of the tunnel, once you get your internship, then it moves, of course, to your next position, which is always very exciting. And maybe, I know, a little scary. Okay, we will also address unique concerns for counseling psychology students as it affects internship and the different topics we're going to discuss this evening. So I've asked each of the four panelists to speak briefly about each of these topics as it applies to their setting, after which we're going to have a little bit of time for your questions, which you can share through us in this chat room down here. I think you all can see my arrow, correct? You see where the arrow is moving? Okay. So just please look at the site window in the chat area where you type your questions. Just make sure this little triangle is turned down because that's how you're going to see all the chats. So if this event proves helpful to all of you, I just want to let you know that we're willing to organize another session in the spring, but this time for like the first step for internship, which is identifying sites and developing your applications. So your feedback for this event is going to be quite important for us, whether or not you thought it was a helpful session and what things you'd like to see done the same and differently and so on. So we're going to try and create a follow-up survey for you guys. So before I begin, I do want to, first of all, thank my colleagues who assisted me in organizing this webinar. Rachel Navarro, who's the president of the CCPTP, that's the Training Council in Counseling Psychology. Ashley Oliver and Erica Wiley, our fabulous SAS leaders. And of course, Skylar Simonovsky. And by the way, if any of you have any tech issues throughout the evening, I have Skylar's email down here, and he's online, and he's paying attention to any concerns that come along. So don't hesitate to email him if you've got some kind of a question. Okay, so let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. And so when I call your name, if you just hold your hand up so we know who you are. I guess all your names are there, so that shouldn't be a big deal then. So we have, first of all, I want to introduce Dr. Eve Adams, who is an academic training director, so has been working with her students all this time in terms of developing their applications. So we thought it would be very important to have somebody like Eve who is on the front lines with all of you developing your applications. Then we also invited Michael Martin from the Atlanta VA Medical Center, and he's going to be addressing VA issues. Dr. Ann Covey from Texas A&M, who works at the Counseling Center, so I know a lot of you are also interested in Counseling Center sites. And then Dr. Chris Sheldon at Denver Health, and he's going to be addressing medical centers and applications and interviews there. So, so let's go ahead and start talking about the interview process, and I just thought maybe we could start with Eve, since I know you've been working with students, and I know you already have been providing some of your suggestions, so I thought we'd start with the academics programs and then move on out to the 3 sites.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marie. So what I was thinking about in terms of my few minutes here is that I'm in the interesting position of having actually been an internship training director at the University of Akron's Counseling Center before I became a faculty member at New Mexico State University. So I kind of feel like I've been able to experience the process, although it was a long time ago when I did the pre-doc internship process. And so the context that I think are really important to just keep in mind is that while participation in both the academic program and a pre-doctoral internship are required for someone to complete their degree, they are very separate processes. And so the folks who are making decisions at one point are not making decisions at the other point, and that makes the student have to be much more astute about what is needed and being looked for in one situation versus the other. And so I've spent a fair amount of time with my students trying to help them build their understanding of what the internship selection process is, uniquely different from the process they went through when they applied for the doctoral program, even though in some ways that will feel fairly similar, at least at the paper end of it. So the one thing I really want to make sure that they are really attuned to is that while those of us in the academic program have the ability to be with a trainee for 3 to 5 years and see that developmental trajectory happen over that period of time, when they go to internship, it has to happen in 1 year. Everything is much more abbreviated, and they've got to. So you've got folks who are wanting at those internship sites to see some in the interview process, someone who can be able to manage a quick transition into a new environment, more globally in terms of where they're living, as well as the system in which they're working, and that they want to see those good foundational skills, but also at the same time to see someone who's open to learning new skills or refining the old skills, and again be able to do that very quickly with people they're just now establishing that relationship with. So that's all to say I think we can have a little more time in the academic program, and things have to happen a little more quickly on the internship process. So that's one thing I emphasize, and also that given how competitive the process is, in terms of the internship process, that it may feel very different in the sense of that they've got to be a little more on point when they're in the internship interview process. So what I'm asking them to really try to demonstrate when they do practice interviews is they have to really be genuine, and they have to be able to demonstrate some ability to be reflective and then articulate about what they know. But the most important thing I've heard time and time again from talking with internship training directors is that there really has to be a goodness of fit, and it's not just a intellectual exercise that really has to come across on multiple levels. So that's the other thing I really try to emphasize. They have to demonstrate their conscientiousness by having really done their homework about the sites and being able to practice that they're also conscientious and that they've practiced talking about their conceptualizations and their experiences. So even though there might be questions that they've not heard before, that shouldn't feel unfamiliar to them to be asked about conceptualization and talking about what they've experienced and being able to reflect on that. I also really emphasize that they need to trust what they've done, that the quality of their training has made them ready for this moment, and then also really focus on managing their anxiety so that they can let who they really are shine through. So that means accepting the anxiety, and I think most training directors will say that they expect people to be somewhat anxious, but they also expect someone to be able to manage that anxiety in such a way that they can really share their, again, what they know and what they've done. So I think I'll stop there at this point and be happy to answer any other questions as they come up.
Thank you, Eve. That was really helpful. And so while we're still, you were talking about you were at the counseling center, maybe we can switch to Mary Ann, who's currently at a counseling center, and maybe talk a little bit about interviews from that particular setting.
Sure. I think what Eve said about being genuine is really important for counseling centers in general. We tend to really want somebody that can connect with the college-age population, which is going to be most likely not that far along from where you are sometimes chronologically. And so to be able to not get stuck in trying to say everything perfectly, but really be able to convey your message. So a great example is case conceptualization, be familiar with a way to articulate it in a way that expresses pragmatically what does that mean you would do with a client, or what would you do in a circumstance that you might get in an interview with a small vignette that somebody might ask you, okay, how might you articulate that based on the way you conceptualize clients. Where we see students get a little stuck in this is they give back to us their theoretical orientation. And we want more pragmatic. We want, what does it look like in action? Like, tell me what's it going to feel like to be in the room with you? How are you going to handle that? I think one of the most challenging things with interviews for us is we want somebody that's going to kind of hit the ground running, like Eve is saying. You get on internship and you forget everything you ever learned in your life, and then you kind of have to relearn it really fast. And part of that's anxiety, and to kind of give you that space to do it, and then we'll be okay. We're full, we're busy. And so we want to see in an interview that, yes, you have strong foundation, you have, a lot of experience, and yes, you're confident in what you're presenting, but then we also want you to want to learn more. We don't want you to be the finished product. This is not a job interview that you're selling yourself in such a way that we don't have anything to offer you. And so have some areas that you want to learn more, you want to challenge yourself more, because we're looking for that balance between the two that I think sometimes is difficult to articulate.
And it sounds like it's not so much being perfect, but being competent and being able to cite the specifics.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then, Mike, if you could address that for VA settings. Thank you.
Sure. I'll say some things that will probably make you a little bit better able to handle things, but maybe a little bit more anxious too, which is that there's obviously no magic formula for interviewing at a VA, just like there's no magic formula for interviewing at a counseling center. Some VAs don't even interview. There's several VAs now that they just have open houses, and they base everything on the application. Our site, we have spent a lot of time with your application before we decide to interview you. So the interview really is just to see if you're the kind of person we want to spend a year with, and if you want to spend a year with us, because it's got to be a good match back and forth. So I think to the extent that you can, you need to be yourself, but at the same time, you want to be professional. And I've been a training director at our site for 4 years, and then I'm still on the training committee. I still interview every year, and every year we get together and talk about people. And you don't necessarily want to be that intern that stood out for the wrong reason, but you want to be the intern that stood out for the right reason, maybe. I think I agree with a lot of things that other folks said. We don't want you just to restate your theoretical orientation. If we ask you to conceptualize, we want you to talk about kind of how you view therapy and how you would be in the room. A lot of people get on the same thing where they say, I believe in cognitive behavioral therapy, and I start with a biopsychosocial assessment, and blah, blah, and it's the same speech from every person. So it's better if you can be yourself and kind of talk about how you see the world and how you see therapy. The other thing I was going to say is for counseling, we were going to focus on counseling throughout. Right. The stereotype of counseling psych students is that they don't have good assessment experience. So you've got to overcome that, because it's very, very important. Your assessment experience is very important, especially in a VA setting. So be prepared to answer questions about your assessment experience. Be prepared to talk about the breadth of your training, if you've done work with severe mentally ill folks, if you've done work outside the stereotypical counseling experiences, make sure and focus on that, because the person across from you may have a stereotype that you've only seen college students, or you've only done health psych kind of work, and you haven't done work at a VA or with a VA population. And the last thing I would say when you're interviewing at a VA is make sure and explain to us why you want to work with veterans, because that's if people come all day long and talk about psychology, but they don't mention why they want to work with veterans or what experience that will give them or what they can learn from working with veterans, then I'm not sure that they're a great fit at our site or not.
Right. And Mike, that's really excellent advice about having counseling psych students be aware about the assessment issues. Are there ways or specifics regarding assessment that might be helpful? Like, gee, I really like this kind of profile or that battery, or is it assessment specific with veterans, for example?
No, it's just having a good foundation. We don't expect you to be able to know our population. And just like everybody said, we want people who want to learn. Right. We don't just one caution I would say when you're interviewing is to look at how the sites treat their interns as far as providers. There are sites that use their interns as workhorses and just to see patients, and those sites might not be as training focused as others. One thing we always emphasize at our site is that we have more rotations than we have interns, and none of our rotations are mandatory. So that shows you that there are rotations that sometimes don't have interns, and those programs run just fine, and what we, if I'm in a rotation and I have an intern, I may see a bit fewer patients and spend some more time on supervision, whereas if I don't have an intern, I just see a few more veterans. And right. That we do that we really don't want to base any of our service delivery on having interns. Now, postdocs are a different story. Postdocs are at a different level, and we do rely on them to do some of our work. So that's something to look at as well.
That is really excellent suggestions, and I would say that for all the settings. I remember that's what I've always told students is pay attention to how the interns who are on site, what kind of experiences they are having, and ask them questions, knowing it's, of course, still an interview situation, but the intern feedback of the people at the site is so critical to tell you what that place is like to be, what kind of a training place it is.
I know at our site we let the interviewees have lunch with the interns without us there.
That's great.
And we don't give our interns any special instructions. We do ask our interns what they think of the applicants, but we don't have the interns formally rate them. Right. But some sites might, and I think that is another good point, that the entire time that you're there, it's an interview. Mm-hmm. Whether you're being told this is part of the interview or not, we've definitely had some people eliminated based on things they said during lunch with the interns.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Chris?
And so I think I want to echo a lot of the things that Mike said. To start off with, I think I would point out that by the time people are coming in to interview at our site, that they've already passed most of the hurdles about whether they've had a certain level of experience with clinical populations and with certain kinds of assessment things. So they've already demonstrated on paper that they can do that they have the knowledge and the experience to be able to be successful at our site. And so I think that we're looking for two areas, and one has to do with goodness of fit, and so some specific items that I would talk about with that. One, we want people who are positive, people who have the kind of a disposition that looks like they're going to be able to fit in with our faculty, to be able to fit in with the cohort, and also to be able to fit in with other people at our facility. And I think at a lot of medical sites that people are going to be applying for, it is actually kind of like a job interview, because we need people not just to be participating in the internship program, but to be representing our profession with other professionals, some of whom are also going through training. And so we want people who have the ability to provide some level of teaching about what psychology is and how it can contribute to medical services, and to do so in a way that is going to be well accepted by other people. We pay attention to how the applicants interact with each other when they're here on interviews, and like Mike said, we do pay attention also before the interviews are getting going and also at lunchtime, just to make sure that people have good interpersonal skills and communication skills, and we want people who are able to who are able to take care of themselves and don't need a whole lot of hand-holding, but yet still are clearly open to some new learning that's going. The second area that we're, I think, focusing on is to see how people are able to think and to conceptualize during the time that they're here. And so in the interview questions that we're asking, we're looking at giving people some vignettes or some situations or some questions about themselves that are designed to see them thinking on their feet. And what we're looking at when we're asking about clinical situations, I think is for people to be able to have a framework to analyze and go through different areas to make sure that they're covering their bases in being able to work up a case. So are they looking at, are there medical conditions that are comorbid? Are they looking at substance use issues? Are they considering alternatives of either clinical information they would gather in the interview or perhaps collateral information that they'd be searching out? And then we're also looking at, in other questions that we might ask or areas where we're talking to them about, do they have some good working knowledge of multidisciplinary teams and of interprofessional collaboration? Can they offer some distinction in different professions for how you might communicate with them, or the contributions that they would make to a clinical situation that would be perhaps a little bit different than what psychology would do. And then, with the counseling psychology in particular, as Mike said, we do. I think it's important to look at the assessment, and depending on the site that you're applying to, then it may make a difference to explain the experience that you've had in working with the kinds of populations that you're dealing with at the site. And those might have to do with the particular kind of multicultural environment, and it might have to do with serious and persistent mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Okay. For any of the three of you who are on site, I'm going to guess most of the applicants have applied to places where they had some fieldwork or practicum experience. Are there any words of wisdom or advice you'd like to give? I mean, I don't know how likely it is, but for folks that may not have as much experience in your particular setting, is there any particular words of wisdom or advice you might like to share with?
I'll say something. We match people all the time that have never worked at a VA, and that's not a problem. But we've rarely matched people who only worked at a college counseling center or with kids. Right. They've usually worked with adults, that maybe have some similar characteristic to veterans, or they've worked in a community mental health center, or they worked in a medical center or something like that at their sites. I think it's just important to sell that the experience you have will transfer. Because if you're smart and you're well trained and you've got some experience that shows you've got a track record of some sort, you're a good bet.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent. All right. At this point, okay, go ahead, Marianne.
Well, I was just going to say I would add to what Mike said. One of the things I think when the applications rose, a lot of counseling centers said you had to have counseling center experience. And for a lot of universities, it surprised a lot of training directors. There were no counseling centers that they could get experience from. And so it was exactly what Mike said. You have to look at the generalizability of what you've done. How are you able to do that? I know a lot of centers, we like that when they've worked in VAs and community mental health to show the variety of different experiences that they've had. So it's not just, kind of be so narrow in your experience that you're just working at counseling centers.
Okay.
I guess I do have one final thing to say about interviewing, and that's when it comes to things like self-disclosure, and when it comes to things like, just how familiar to be with people, you need to show that you have good boundaries. You need to demonstrate them, and so appropriate self-disclosure is great. And talking about, but it needs to be appropriate self-disclosure. And the final comment I'll make is on professional dress. It's not something that I notice a whole lot, but other interviewers at my site and other sites do. And there have been times we've been having discussions at the end of the day, and some folks have said, well, I liked her, she seemed great, but what she was wearing just didn't seem appropriate, or I thought she should have been wearing this, or there's been people comment on people having a nose ring or having crazy socks on or things like that. And if you just knock the interview out of the park and you just seem great and like the exact person that we want, you can pull that off. But if not, then you actually have to overcome that with some interviewers.
And I'm going to guess that differs a little bit across sites, but it is always better to be more professional, or on the side of being more professional than more casual. Exactly. Okay. Thank you all. We do have a few minutes if there's anybody that'd like to type some questions into the chat area, and then I'll go ahead and read that for our panelists.
Don't be shy.
And now's your moment.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing while we're waiting for folks to type in, which is that as I heard the theme through the different folks who just spoke, and just coming back around to, I think it's really important again to try and remember what are the distinctions between the interview process or the application process for internship versus for an academic training program. And often many academic training programs are looking for intellectual ability, research skills, your ability to maybe work with specifically whichever advisor you're going to work with. So while interpersonal skills are part of it, it's much less. And so I just really want to highlight that everyone did say you need to come with those interpersonal skills already well intact and well practiced. And then the conceptual piece is on top of that, but that's something they're going to help you refine and learn more about other theories, but you've got to come with those interpersonal skills.
Yes, very important. I think that's the common theme I've heard from all of you, is that it's important to be yourself, and yourself is somebody that people want to work with, somebody that's ready to learn, and somebody that can apply practically what they have learned theoretically.
I would also want to just follow up on it can be helpful when you're talking to people at a site to indicate that you know something about about the site, and maybe even something about the community in which that site is found. So if people talk to me about something about Denver that they know, that can help to indicate some reason why they want to come to our site. Or if there's things more specific than just knowing that it's a hospital system, I think that can help to be a little bit of a bridge that can indicate that we might have a good fit.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm guessing since we haven't had anybody chat in a question, that
I've got questions, but are they coming just to me?
Oh,
really?
You do?
No, I'm not seeing them.
So I have one question that I typed an answer to. Does the VA accept international students? Which is a great question. And unfortunately, you do have to be a U.S. citizen to work at a VA, and that includes internship and postdoc. And we have in the past interviewed people who are going through the citizenship process, but we have said you must be done with it by match day, or by the time we have to turn our stuff in, because otherwise we can't accept you. So that is an exception with VAs.
Okay, very important.
I also see a question on how to prepare for in-person versus Skype versus phone interviews. And personally, I don't have we only do in-person interviews at our site. We've only made exceptions for that one year when there was a giant ice storm in Atlanta. But I know a lot of places do Skype and do phone interviews, and I don't think I have any advice to give other than what I've already said about being yourself and just trying to present present yourself in the best light you can.
Makes
Anybody
sense.
want to comment on that?
I would.
Okay.
Yeah. On Skype, if you're reading your answers, we see you, and so I think sometimes people forget, or they're not connected to that. And we had blatant holding up the paper, and we actually asked them to lower it, and then they were stunned that we saw them. And that's the same for the phone. You want to continue to be natural sounding, and you don't want to sound too artificial. We do all three forms of interviewing, and over the years, a good phone interview is going to be a great. We're still going to rank them very high. We don't have any preference, and so I would also trust the sites. But I also hear often from applicants that they want to come and see, just to have their own experience. But that would be the biggest. We've done phone interviews where you can hear the car door slamming or the put your seatbelt light on, and so we know they're doing it while they're driving. So I think Chris talked about professionalism, and to remember that's across all three of these forms of interviewing.
Very, very good point. I remember, because I did a phone interview years and years ago, the one thing that felt strange is because the interviewers are taking notes while you're speaking, so the conversation may not seem as spontaneous, so just be prepared for some moments of silence, and it's not because they're making faces, it's because they are taking notes and making sure that they're hearing what you're saying.
So the next question I see, are you looking at the questions tab on the dashboard? Because that's where I'm getting all these.
I'm wondering if it's going, people can indicate whether it's going to the entire audience or to other people. So you maybe just be getting them directed to you.
Yeah, and I think they're showing questions, and because, yes, they are using the questions instead of the chat, exactly.
So the other one I have is, how do we talk about areas of growth in the interview? Should we talk about circumstances that prevented experience in that area, or just a desire to grow in that area? And I think, first of all, you have to talk about areas of growth because you have them, and we want you to have them, because otherwise we wouldn't be wanting to train interns. I don't think you spend too much time apologizing that you're from a rural site and there just is no VA near there in our case, and it could be the same thing with counseling center or any other kind of site. You may want to point that out, that you really wanted that experience but you couldn't get it, but I'd spend a lot more time talking about how our site will meet that need. So if you don't have a ton of assessment experience and you see we have a strong assessment training program, for example, you flip that and say, that's the reason we want to come to your site.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see.
Someone asked specifically, do we recommend a suit for both men and women specifically, or any other recommendations? I think that's going to be site specific, but I think when in doubt, male or female, go with a suit.
I would agree.
I would agree.
Yeah. There's another question here about scheduling conflicts. Yeah.
Well, I know for us, we know they happen, and we have 4 different interview days, and we can work around those 4 days. But sometimes at the end of the day, we say, hey, the only slot we have left is on Thursday, and if you really want to be here, you got to choose us over somebody else. There's other people more flexible than we are.
That's about the same as we do. We make every effort to accommodate people, but at the end of the day, there's only so many interviews you can have in any given day.
Yeah. I would just say be as polite as possible. Yeah. It's just a tough dilemma for both sides. Okay, I'm going to go through some of these questions if we've already kind of addressed them. How about the tell us about yourself question? Any suggestions? What specific types of information would sites like to hear when asking, tell us about yourself?
That's a mean question.
I mean, I would be prepared to have two or three things that have been important to you in the course of your learning to become a psychologist, and that hopefully those would be things that would also resonate to the sites you're applying to.
Okay.
Or if there's something you're really passionate about.
That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, and again, even unique concerns for counseling psych. Here, talk about why did you go to a counseling psych program? Like, what is it about you that makes you connected to that program, and how does it kind of influence how you see the world?
Mm-hmm. Okay. What should I bring with me to the interview? Will they be most concerned about research or practice? I think you guys addressed that. Practice?
Practice.
Much pragmatics, yeah. Can you all see these questions as I type them up?
Not in a very small area. For some reason, they're
that's
showing
all
up.
I have, yeah. Do hospital sites prefer clinical or counseling? How strict are the cutoffs for assessment hours in hospitals?
I would say for us that we are not hard and fast for that. We would like for people to have a certain amount of assessment experience, but if people look really strong in other areas, then if we can see that they're making some efforts to get some additional assessment experience between the time that they've sent in that they completed the API and the time they'll be starting internship, then we're happy to work with them and fudge a little bit on what the numbers are that we're asking for.
Okay.
And for us, we have a different cutoff every year because we look at the pool. So we put everybody into a spreadsheet and we sort and we figure out where that cut's going to be as far as assessment hours and also clinical hours. And that's going to vary by VA. I can talk about our site, but other VAs, we say flat out, we do not want to teach you how to administer a WACE. We expect you to know how to at least administer a WACE and have done it several times. We'll teach you more how to interpret one. There are other sites, especially the more rural VAs that don't get as high application rate as we do, are a little more generous with that. Something else that may make you nervous is we got 120 applications or so, 120 something, and we've already cut the pool down to 70 just based on numbers alone. And that's based on therapy hours and assessment hours because we can't possibly look at 120 applications and spend as much time with them as we want to in order to be able to really be discerning on who we interview. So everyone we interview, we've already accepted them on paper. We just want to see if they're a good fit or not.
Okay. We have somebody asking about a good answer to a conceptualization question. If it's too direct, maybe what are less helpful responses to that kind of a questions, as well as attributes that you find particularly positive for interns.
I would say on the clinical vignettes that there is a not infrequent problem of people who miss some glaring, what seems to us at least a kind of a glaring clinical area that at least ought to be thought about or inquired about. And so, and that's where I'm thinking that people ought to be approaching how they answer a clinical vignette by having a framework that they're using to apply to that before you ever go in the room and read the question. The other suggestion that I would make is for people to take a little bit of time to think about the question before they start answering. Sometimes I think they're trying to answer too quickly and they get themselves in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I think whenever possible, bringing up an actual client helps because that kind of demonstrates your experience. But if you don't have one and you're kind of doing it on the fly, then you really need to go with theory and show that you know theory well and that you can give me a reason why someone would get better with a given illness or a given condition, given the theory that you practice from.
Okay. I have a question here from, this is for people that are in couples and so on, and somebody's asking, I'm curious about your experience about disclosing if you are married or wearing a wedding ring. This person had received feedback that they should remove the ring and not disclose if they're married because of concerns about moving and being able to relocate and so on. Any thoughts on that?
I would say be yourself and feel free to talk about that all you want. I did a seminar for graduate students talking about internship one time, and someone said, well, what about if you're applying and you have a family? And I said, well, as far as I know, all of our applicants have families. of some kind. You know, and it could easily be. And some people worried that if they have kids or if they have a spouse, that might mean they were less dependable or they might be gone more. But you know, some of the emergencies we've had with interns involved a parent or a sibling, or you know, anybody can have personal things go wrong. I know at our site we don't care at all, and in fact, if there's a reason geographically you want to move to Atlanta, we'd probably like to know that, and I think that would generalize to most other sites.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about visiting sites? I know a couple of you mentioned that earlier. If you don't do a formal interview, is it welcomed, or I've heard a variety of answers over the years.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. You know, APIC did a study trying to really look at saving students money and if they would choose to go, regardless of if they had to or not. And over 80% of the students said they want to go and see the sites. And I thought that was very interesting. 15 years ago, when I was first training director, I decided I was going to eliminate the open houses and in-person interviews, and we would just do phone to try to save students money. And the backlash I got of people saying, you know, I need to see and I need to go there, and then also to balance, to understand people can't afford to go to every single place they're applying. And so I think people really vary. Sites vary on, you know, what their procedures are for the. But if you're doing both, one isn't favored over the other.
Okay.
But I will say this. I think Mike said it, but I'm not exactly sure. But if you stand out for the wrong reasons, you know, you do stand out. And if you're going to an all-day open house, you need to recognize all day is an interview. And so one of the things that we've had are people playing on their phone when they think it's not a important meeting, or they're rude to our associate staff, or they show up late for the open house. I mean, these are huge red flags that we're saying, if you're doing this on interview day, I can't even imagine what you're going to do during this semester.
So, something else we've had people do is, we had one guy who the faculty really liked, but all during the lunch and all the breaks, he just grilled our interns on what was it we wanted to hear. You know, what did you say that got you the site, and it's like he was looking for the magic answer. And they were all like, we were just ourselves. There is no magic answer, you know, and that got back to us, that he just, you know, he never was himself during lunch. He seemed to be trying to crack the code. So we kind of didn't feel like we were getting a genuine experience with him.
Right. Okay.
You know, I think goodness of fit works both ways.
Absolutely.
You know, you guys have been working on getting to where you are now for a long time, and I think you have every right to expect that an internship program is going to be a good host for you. You know, and not just in the clinical training, but in treating you like the kind of person that you want to be treated.
That's right.
And so I think that a big part of the on-site interview is for you to be able to get a real sense of how do the current interns feel about the experience, but also how do the staff and how do the faculty, you know, what kind of an environment do they have, and how satisfied are they with their lives, and are they the kind of professionals that are the kind of people that you want to be in a few years?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'm realizing we're about halfway through our time. I do know I'm going to guess that for most people watching the webinar, this is probably the most important topic. I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to get all these. There's some really excellent questions here.
Can I say one more thing before we transition that I forgot to point out that I think is really important? When you're interviewing, show us that you know something about our site. You know, we put all our public materials out there. Make sure you've reviewed the brochure, you know what our rotations are. You know, you don't have to have everything memorized because sites are complicated. But, you know, if someone says, do you have any questions, have questions and make them relevant to our site. You know, so I was reading in your brochure that you sometimes allow interns to blah, blah, blah. Can you tell me more about that? Is a really good question, because then even if you're not super interested in it, you look interested at least, and you may learn something that you do want to do when you get here.
Right, right.
I have one other. One other interviewing suggestion that I wanted to offer. You know, the interview process can be pretty darn grueling, and it's also a time of year when there's colds going around, whatever. And sometimes I think that we have people who are coming to the interview who may not be functioning at 100%. I would advise people applicants to let the site know if if you haven't had very much sleep the night before, if you're getting over a cold, if this is your third interview in the past 4 days, because it's better if people have a context to be able to understand where you're coming from rather than to just let them imagine on their own why you seem to be looking like you're not paying as much attention as some of the other applicants.
100% agree. We had someone last year whose flight was delayed like 7 hours, and they had just gotten in like an hour before the interview time, and they hadn't slept. And they shared that with us, and there were times when someone said, yeah, he seemed kind of bored, and someone else said he'd only had 2 hours of sleep. And that was someone we ended up actually ranking kind of high because his answers were great. He just seemed a little out of it.
That's an excellent idea. And it just goes back to just good interviewing skills for any kind of position. I think those are just being able to handle heads-up situation like that always shows that you can handle those kinds of changes that come upon you, and that's the kinds of things that happen on internship. Okay.
Marie, I'm just going to go with one question here, and also ask one of the other folks, but it had to do with their applying to a child site, and did they have any thoughts? And I don't think anyone here has that as their focus, but it did make me think about how I think with a site that's focused on children, you do need to have some specialized training with children, whether that's a practicum or some other thing. But it made me think about that we have a number of folks who will come to our doctoral program having already been in a master's program that might have been, for instance, more child-focused there. They didn't necessarily get that training as much in the doctoral program, although some of them were at least able to find some field experiences in that regard. So I think it is important to remember that your master's experiences do count here as well as your doctoral. But I was curious if, for the rest of the panelists, if you look at those hours differently in some way. Because I think that's a more common thing with counseling psych students than it might be with clinical psych students.
Yeah.
Well, we have 2 child positions at our facility, and we would absolutely expect that people who we would rank high for the internship would have some amount of experience with children, and we're looking at a kind of a bottom layer of maybe 12 to 14 children or adolescents that they have some individual therapy experience with.
Okay.
And would it matter whether that was at the master's or doctoral level when they got those experiences?
It would make a difference to us, yes. That if you have some of that at the master's level, that's fine. But if people have gone for 3 or 4 years without doing any work with kids, then it's going to raise questions about how good of a fit they're going to be at this point.
Okay. I have a final question here about this.
We do look at master's experience, but we don't look at it much. We look mostly at doctoral.
Okay. I have a final question here about disability status. Would sites prefer to know during the interview? Would this impact placement?
Just so you know, I mean, the disability law would say that you can't ask that question.
Right.
All you can ask is whether or not you can perform the functions of the job.
Mm-hmm. The reasonable accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
With reasonable accommodations.
Okay, so I think we are going to turn to our next topics, and apologies, I mean, there were some other questions in there, and I guess we'll see if we can figure out a way for people's questions to get responded to. But anyways, that's just part of the process of having 75 people on the line. But thank you all for your thoughtful questions. Okay, so let's think about now in terms of final decisions and ranking. And again, I'll start with Eve and to make some comments about the final process of figuring out how you want to rank and where you want to go.
Right. I think the most important thing that I just remind my students over and over again is not to try and figure out some system like if I rank someone higher that I'm thinking more likely will rank me higher, that would be better. I just really say this is a truly a values clarification exercise. Figure out what it is you want to, which was most ideal for you, and rank away. Now, what they will sometimes also ask is, what if, should I rank everyone? And I said, you know, always think of it in terms of, would you rather go through this process again with some of the ones that are your least favorite sites? Is it good enough? Is it good enough to say this will be a decent learning experience for you in wherever it is, wherever that might be located, rather than go through this process again? So that's the other main piece of advice. But my understanding is that the way the system is set up, it privileges the trainees or the applicants' ranking actually over the sites, in the sense that you should rank your top choice, whether you think you're going to get that is likely or not.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Marianne?
I think one of the things that I get asked a lot about is, you know, will you contact me after the interview? Will there be a, you know, are you going to cut me after this procedure, or is there a way to kind of know if I'm going to be ranked high, or people will even indicate you are my number one. And at the end of our interview, we always say we follow APIC guidelines. We will not give you any indication of your ranking, and we also, you know, tell you that this is kind of what Eve just said. The system favors the trainee, and so to really rank as genuine and as honestly as you can. I will say for us, last year was the first time we went to the second phase, and we had phenomenal applicants. And I say that because, you know, we had about 100 applicants. We interviewed probably 35, and we only ranked 18 for 4 spots. And during that process, we said, I'd rather go to the second phase than possibly rank some of these people. And that was, you know, usually we aren't down that low, but we kind of had the flip side to what Eve said. I want to be clear that this is who we want to work with. And I think there's a lot less fear to going to phase 2 for sites because it's happening more frequently because of as the imbalance kind of starts to shift. So again, I encourage the students to, you know, really choose what you want and to understand that that's, you know, a huge value in it.
The thing I'll say too about ranking is at the end of the day, some of what you're doing is going with your gut and going with your feelings. And how did you feel when you were there? Did you feel good? Did you feel like this is the kind of place you want to spend a year? It's a big decision, and it, you know, where you intern is very important, especially if it's somewhere where you want to settle down, because you can make connections there for postdoc, you can make connections there for a job. But barring that, you just need to get the best training experience you possibly can, and you need to see yourself as happy. And so just to play off what Marianne said, from the site point of view, we don't want to rank somebody if we would rather go to phase 2, but you don't want to rank us if you think you're going to be miserable for a year because we don't have the right kind of training experience for you. You'd be better off going through the process again than being miserable for a year, especially in a city you don't want to be in or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And Chris?
You know, I think I agree with what Mary and Mike have said, and I don't really have a lot to add. I think that I would encourage people to do their rankings based on goodness and fit, and you know, does the site have the kind of training program that you like, and you know, will you be getting the experience you like? Is it a good community within the organization, and then is the community outside of the organization one that you might be interested in making some connections and potentially finding work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I would agree. I mean, this is what I've always understood is pick the site that you feel is the best site in terms of just your interpersonal fit as well as your professional fit. It's just there's not going to be anything that's the Goldilocks formula, but just something that approximates the closest to your own professional goals. Okay, let's see let's turn back to the questions. We have a question from Lindsay. I was told you don't have to rank every site. Is there a maximum number you all would recommend for ranking?
I think Mike gave the right answer, that you should rank every site that you think that you're going to be happy at, or maybe it was Mary, I don't remember what, but just don't rank sites where you don't want to be, but I would rank all of the other sites. It really can't hurt you.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, I'm just looking at some of these questions.
I think the one thing I would just say is that there are folks who have applied to places where they initially thought, well, I don't know that I want to end up there, including, for instance, Las Cruces, where we're located. But sometimes once you go there, you think, well, for a year I wouldn't mind. I could be there as long as I'm getting good training. And I think, good enough is sometimes a mixture of what is, again, values clarification, what's most important to you. Generally, it's that you're getting good training with good supervision. That's what it mainly boils down to. There's a lot of differences beyond that, and it's always going to be a matter of plus and minuses. There are some sites that will give you certain experiences, other sites give you other experiences. So as long as you're feeling good about a good chunk of that to me is what's important.
I think that's true. I'm also on the academic side, and that's usually what we tell our students too. I mean, if you think about all the energy and time and even money that's gone into this internship application process, yeah, if you can find a good enough, even if it's not the most perfect fit, it is a year, and there's, you can do a lot of things and live in a lot of places for a year. Okay. I'm just looking at some of these questions. These are more about matching still.
I will say that at our site, we went into phase 2 last year also, and that was the first time that's happened since I've been there, and that's 16 years. And okay. I was very pleasantly taken with the quality of the people who ended up matching with us in phase 2, and so I would encourage people, even if there's not a successful match in phase 1, that things really still might work out well for you. There is a significantly better environment in terms of the match between the number of sites and the number of applicants than there used to be.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, we went to phase 2 2 years ago. And we were really surprised, and we also didn't interview enough people and rank enough people, I think. And I totally agree that we got one person who matched from phase 2, and he was dynamite. And the people we interviewed were just really good. So, and we got one of our interns this year who's just a shining star, didn't match and went through the process again. And it may be more than her. She just self-disclosed that. So, we definitely don't look down on that at our site, and that's something that definitely happens.
I know APIC has some really good rules about what sites and applicants can share or not share about ranking. And so there's a question here about how, it's almost like how do you handle the delicate dance of saying to you, you're not my #1 rank, or what are some thoughts or suggestions you all have seen and what works in terms of whether or how much a student should express where you are in their ranking, and vice versa. I know you guys can't really talk in that way, but just maybe some words of advice about this whole dance around what do you share with in terms of where you see somebody being ranked and the site being ranked.
So, we don't provide any specific ranking information to applicants, and would not expect that applicants would do that for us either. On the other hand, there is nothing that prevents us from telling an applicant that they would be a good match at our site, and that they have the qualifications, and so vice versa. You can't tell people where you're going to rank them, but you can certainly indicate that you like them, or that they like you, and that it would be a happy experience.
Okay.
And for our site, we don't care at all where you're going to rank us, because we trust the process. And if you leave and don't like us and want to go somewhere else, then you got good information during the interview that we're not a good place to be. And when we sit down and rank everybody, we look at both our application ratings and the ratings they got on interview day, and then we talk about intangibles, and we move people up and down. But we never do it based on where we think they're going to rank us, because if you end up not ranking us very high, then it'll move down the list. It doesn't hurt us in any way.
Yeah. That's the nice thing about the ranking as it is now, because I remember the days of the call, people waiting for hours. Not fun.
Yep.
The ranking is way better. And I think this is, can you only rank sites you interview at?
You can rank any site.
Yeah, okay. It just makes sense to rank the sites you interview at, yeah. But you never know.
You can rank any site that's going to rank you.
Yeah. This is true. Okay. Okay, we're still getting questions about the interview or the matching of things, how people are selected, and just in the interest of time, let's shift to the transitioning to the, Eve, did you have?
There is one more, there is one here I just saw that says, and it kind of goes along, I guess, with the difficult personal decisions in terms of cost of housing, stipend versus goodness of fit, or a wonderful fit.
Oh, yes.
Leave a partner for a year. In short, how would you suggest we navigate these difficult decisions? And I guess the one thing I would say is that for some people it's really important to have that discussion. Obviously with family members would be a part of that, but that it's not necessarily just an individual decision, that there are times you're going to be making that decision. Talking it through with an advisor sometimes helps, or the training director, as well as family. Some people need to spend a little, it's an iterative process. They have to kind of talk that through. At one point in time, they get more information, sit with it for a while, go through it a second time. Some people do kind of a pros and cons list, the pros to go in one place and cons, and then pros and cons to the other place. So I would just encourage folks to, it is definitely there's no one decision way to do that, but I do think for some people it does help to have more people involved in talking that through.
Yeah, up to a point. You can talk yourself about it.
Then you got to roll the dice, right?
Yeah, exactly. At some point you have to make that tough call. Exactly.
You can discuss your issues during interview, but you don't want to agonize over it during the interview. You want to spend the interview telling them why they want you, not that you're ambivalent.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that those are two very different times. So your ambivalence, it comes later. You want to go with each interview. You want to go as if that you are sure that's the place you want to go until proven otherwise. And then afterwards is when you can deliberate about what might be better than another place.
And that even if you have one of those extensive point systems and you've ranked across 20 different dimensions in every single site, there will still be a sense of uncertainty, and that's just a natural part of this process. And so just accept that'll still be there. But those other kinds of strategies help, even sometimes if you're not sure of which site is better at one thing or another. That does help clarify, but it won't take away that uncertainty in the end. I mean, it's just part of it. If you think back to when you made a decision for your academic program too. Okay. Any other questions I may have missed? Somebody asked a question about intangibles. Are there things that people can say? What are those extra things that people are rated on in addition to their interview and applications? This is back to the interview or the matching process. Intangibles.
I think I used that word earlier. And what I meant by it when I said it was, sometimes when people interview, they just have this certain something about them or something that makes them stand out. They may be more eager to learn. They may be a better fit for one of our rotations over another. The problem with the intangibles is, we can't guarantee how we're going to get ranked. But if we put, 10 people in our top 10 that all want to be in health or all want to just do PTSD work, then we may end up with a class of people who just want to do that, and we have a much more diverse site than that. So sometimes it has to do with trying to get people with diverse interests. We definitely want a diverse class from every way possible, and we look at that when we're doing our rankings. And sometimes it was some of that stuff I was talking about before about standing out in a bad way on interview day. We may bump somebody down even though their scores were good in some areas because we got bad feedback from the interns, or some people had a bad feeling about them.
Right. Okay. I don't see any other questions about the rankings. So let's move on to just simply the transitioning to the intern role. This is when the light at the end of the tunnel is there.
Or the start of a new tunnel.
Yeah. Yeah. A shorter tunnel before the long tunnel. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I send them on their way. So I think I'll go ahead and let the other three folks talk about that transition time. Other than I would say this, the more a student has gotten as much of their dissertation done before they can leave on internship, that's a really, really, really good thing.
And don't underestimate just how long it takes to pack.
Okay.
So I think two things. First, you mentioned dissertation. If you have defended your dissertation or you are close, let us know that during the interview. That makes you look really good. If you say, oh, I'm scheduled to propose on such and such a date, we all know what that means, which is maybe you'll propose on that date and maybe you won't. And that may take up a big chunk of your time when you're on internship. That's not going to cut you or anything like that, but it's just one piece of information. As far as transitioning in, I think people at the very beginning, you don't need to walk in like you own the place and walk in like you're entitled to anything. You're here to learn, and you're obviously entitled to be treated with respect and to be given good training. But humility goes a long way, along with confidence. I give everyone the same piece of advice every year in the beginning when we do some orientation, which is be very, very nice to the secretaries and the nurses, because they can either make your life really, really good or really, really bad. And we've had interns make some of our, we call them MSA, medical support assistants, mad on their first week, and sometimes their appointments don't get put in right and things just don't go well. So I think just any advice that I would give that's kind of common sense about being a professional, presenting yourself well, and showing up on day one ready to learn.
Yeah. I really appreciate Mike's comments about the staff. The staff are so important to the functioning of any organizational unit, and a lot of times people don't get how massively overworked they can be, and so I think that is just so wise to start out positively, well, not demanding. Be kind with the staff, and the staff always are kind with you. I've been like that since I was a graduate student, and now I'm a department chair, and I can tell you, I still live by those words. The staff just make or break can make or break your experience at any organization. They're very important people, very special.
With transitioning, I think that interns underestimate what a 9-to-5 day looks like, and so they are frequently, the sleep patterns aren't there yet. They're used to, working probably well more than 40 hours a week, but it was never that they had to be to work at 8, and then they stayed, and there was no, and I always get interns. Well, how do I like, get my errands done? And I'm like, well, this is a job. Like, you're here. You can't just go off. And it's really a shock to them because they've had such freedom that in some ways the transition to not having the same flexibility with their schedule is very difficult. At the end of the year, I always ask, what was the most surprising thing about your transition to being an intern? And I bet you 90% will say it was working a intact 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
And sometimes then the work week may actually go over 40 hours at some sites too. It's a good idea to have a sense from the outgoing interns, if you can, about what the work week is going to look like. But I would totally agree that just having that scheduled, structured life can be a big transition for people who've been in school for a few years. I would encourage the new interns when they come on board to be listening more than talking. So you're not to be cautious about strutting your stuff too much at first until you get a sense of what the environment is like and where your particular skills can fit in. But the other thing I would say then is you may need to just stay until the job gets done, and that's what happens with our medical colleagues. There are some days when they have to stay quite a bit more than an 8-hour day, and it really helps if they know that the psychology trainees are going to be willing to do the same thing if they have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the kind of position where it gets real, and you do have to stay with the situation until it's as resolved as it can be. Yes.
That's an important thing to ask the interns during interview, and we're supposed to tell you in our public materials, and if you ask what the average number of hours per week is, and our site prides ourselves on being a 40-hour a week internship site, and that may mean 45. You may stay an hour late here and there at first, but once you get it down, we really do want people to have balance, and but that's also why we don't have any sort of research experience. Augusta VA, for example, they call themselves a 45 or a 50-hour a week site, and they tell you that up front, but they also have a research component that we don't offer. And so different sites should tell you up front, whether or not it's a 40-hour or 40 plus.
On a positive side, I recall in terms of transitioning, number one, having an office with my name on it so that it was my professional space. And I don't know if the 3 intern directors who are here, if that's what you do offer your interns, but I remember feeling, wow, that in addition to the structured world, it was also, I had a space with a name and my phone, and it really was a professionalizing experience. So that to me was actually very positive and helped me to kind of deal with this whole structured piece of that my life was going to become for that year. Mm-hmm. Marianne, I think you were going to say something.
No. Well, I know what I was going to say. One of the things with the counseling center world is your schedule changes drastically based on the semester, and so there are times right now. This is the busiest time of year, and so I know everybody's working more than 40 hours, even though we say we're a 40-hour internship. But then I also know that during the break we're all going to watch Star Wars, probably for, 6 consecutive hours. So, to know that there's times where we are crazy busy, but because we're a college counseling center, they all go home. And then we are there. So there we do some research, and there will be different seminars offered, but the practical push of client hours changes during the year.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
It's an interesting question about the physical plant and the physical space that people will be working in. And I think there's a lot of transition that's going on in healthcare facilities and in hospitals right now. And so I know at our site we're moving pretty rapidly into an environment where none of the doctors have offices. and that where people are working out of cubicle spaces and exam rooms, and so my people are kind of in process of working through that transition themselves.
Yeah. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left, so in that time, I thought maybe then we can talk about the next transition into the super long tunnel of one's career and the notion of applying for jobs, postdoc versus a position, and I'll just open it up to whoever would like to speak.
I know for us, one of the things that happens with the job search is the faculty positions are first, and they tend to be out in the fall. And so our interns that are looking faculty, they are amped up more for the job search, and they are, looking at the different, positions, and so that's going to vary. Then your postdocs are going to be offered usually in January, February, and then the Psych 1 positions kind of hold off, and they're kind of more April, May. But I will say that counseling centers are at the highest level of kind of jobs that are out there, that last year and even this year, people are having trouble filling their jobs because because of Virginia Tech and what happened multiple years ago, finally universities have really gotten involved in creating new positions. And I know at Texas A&M we had 4 new positions. California schools they averaged 2 to 3 brand new positions. And so it was quite an influx last year of positions.
That's a great something just for everybody to know, as well as the timing of jobs, right? Because right now here at TC, where I am, we have our job positions now, so that faculty jobs, especially of the higher end or the the more research-intensive positions, tend to be announced now. Like they tend to be announced in August of your internship year. So. And then, some of the more practice-oriented ones are just year-round. Would you say, Marianne, that there's any kind of cycle for staff positions at counseling centers in terms of when they're approved and advertised, or they're pretty much year-round?
You know what? Because of the intern year cycle, if it's a Psych 1 position, you'll see most people will wait and offer it in the summer instead of offering it, looking at something that they wouldn't qualify for another 3 months. So you will see, they won't be offered that frequently like now. You're not going to see a Psych 1 position. People who have not matched a Psych 1 position have pulled it back, and they'll repost it come the spring.
Okay. And then, go ahead.
For VAs, most of our people go on to postdoc, and postdoc is now, applications are starting. We have a postdoc, and our postdoc application deadline's in early January, and that's pretty typical. And the interview and match, it's not a match for a postdoc, is just after internship match. So we drop internship and immediately pick up postdoc, and we're doing that kind of simultaneously. There are VAs that will hire people fresh off internship, but most VAs won't. Most VAs expect you to have a year of postdoc experience and a license in hand before they'll hire you. That's not totally true with a license in hand. You can get it in your first few months. Okay. There are VAs that will hire people fresh off internship. They tend to be the VAs that are more rural and have a hard time recruiting. And so that does happen. I know at our site we start doing seminars on looking at your CV and deciding on where you're going to apply to postdoc around October.
Okay. And in my recollections from students that do postdoc, that is very seriously termed postdoc. So you must have your PhD finished, or otherwise you create a lot of just trouble for yourself and the agency that you have negotiated with, because you will leave them hanging. They cannot bring you in without a doctorate, is my understanding.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting somewhat close to the end of the seminar, so I think this might be a timely to say here that this is a great time to be on the cusp of becoming a psychologist. And the reason I say that is because the job opportunities are just tremendous right now. There's growth in counseling centers, as we talked about. There's been significant growth in the VAs, and there are lots of opportunities in the healthcare system and in hospitals too. And so what I've seen over this past 5 or 6 years is a very significant growth in postdoctoral opportunities, and postdoctoral opportunities that are designed to fit a variety of different career paths and career interests. And so 6 years ago, I would say that maybe a third of the people who went through my program would go into a postdoc. Now it's almost everybody does, and it's really been encouraging. And so I think it's a very helpful thing for a person to get that postdoc under their belt.
Okay. What about in terms of special or unique concerns for counseling psych students in their pursuit of postdoc or other kinds of positions? Any thoughts there?
I don't know if it has to do with counseling psych, but the one thing I would just say is that as it relates to postdoc positions is to just be really attuned to whether you're in one of those states where you have to get the postdoc hours, or you get licensed automatically within that state once you get your degree. And because my understanding is there are some folks who will still try to get those postdoc hours under supervision just in case they move to another state where they would need that. So just be really attentive to the very different licensure laws from state to state.
Yep.
Following up on that, and that's an excellent point, Ethan. People also ought to look at the number of hours that are required for licensure or for the internship in their particular states, because there are some differences from state to state.
Absolutely. That's a really important point, especially if you're seeking a faculty position. A lot of states still don't recognize those positions as eligible for towards licensure. New York is unusual in that if you teach 12 years, that does count towards licensure, but other states are really, really restrictive. So that's another piece to look at if you are looking at the academic job search.
Right, and that's a question that often will come up is, should I do that postdoc year just so I can get licensed before I go for a faculty position, or am I kind of losing out on some like I'm missing out on the train that gets you into a faculty position? And I think it really depends on the type of university where you ultimately want to work. Some of them, particularly if you're teaching an undergraduate and they're not even looking for scientist practitioner, they're not even looking at whether or not you're licensed. But if you're applying to a program that is either generally a doctoral program in counseling psych, then they are often wanting someone who's license eligible, and so you might actually have more opportunities should you have that license a year postdoc, have the formal postdoc, and then apply for faculty positions. I think is probably the ideal. But I mean, I was working for 6 years as a counseling psychologist at the University of Akron Counseling Center before I transitioned into a faculty job. So I think there's lots of different ways to do that.
Yeah, there used to be the old-time wisdom of, if you want faculty, go immediately to faculty, don't pass go. And these days I've seen so many people, they spend a few years in some kind of practice position. It really strengthens their experiential level, that then also bring that to their teaching job. So there is no hard and fast career path. I mean, it really is of your making. I do have a question here, Marianne, for somebody applying to a counseling center. They're asking, would you recommend applying to a postdoc position or applying to just straight up to a counseling center staff or that kind of position? I mean, is there any preferences, you think, for counseling centers?
Yeah, because the biggest difference is going to be how much you're paid and what happens after the postdoc. If you're not interested in what the specialty area is in the postdoc. So a lot of counseling centers, they have gone the postdoc in learning about counseling center work. And it's really not a specialty, but it is a way that they can keep their interns an extra year and get them their hours of eligibility for their license. And so the interns kind of know that. I tell my interns in general to look to see what's available, what are they wanting in terms of if there's an area of substance abuse, or if it's assessment, or if it's, you know, specific learning disability assessment. I mean, there are very practical postdocs that are going to give you a lot of different experiences that we're not going to give as a general internship. But if they're both equal, then I would go for the Psych 1s, because that's going to give you obviously more long-term job security as well as a higher salary.
Yeah, yeah. And then for VAs in hospital settings, is a postdoc really recommended, and is it, I mean, I know it's helpful, especially if you could get specialized training, but what's your sense of people's career paths in VAs in hospital settings, of whether or not to get a postdoc before applying for a full-on position?
I think it's going to depend on the VA. For VAs, like I said before, the rural VAs are more likely to hire somebody straight out of internship and give them supervision for a year. VAs where we get a lot of applications, you know, we get a lot of people applying at the Atlanta VA. We don't even consider people unless they've got a year experience. And that doesn't have to be a formal postdoc. It can be, we have a lot of folks who go out and get supervised in private practice, or people that have not accredited, not formal postdocs, but they get the experience, and we're fine with that.
Okay.
On the hospital side, it makes a big difference what the reimbursement system looks like for the particular population that the healthcare system works with. And so for many of the hospital systems, they may not be able to get reimbursed at a decent level unless somebody is licensed. And so those sites are going to be looking for people who have had some kind of a postdoctoral experience. I think it's helpful. I think a formal postdoc is often helpful for people to carve out an area of special expertise, so that they have a place in the healthcare system where they can make a contribution where very few other people could do the same thing. And so I think that creates the potential for them to ultimately be able to be reimbursed a little bit better too.
Okay. And then I would say for faculty positions, postdoc is not necessarily that important unless it sort of relates to your research, your line of research program that you intend to pursue. And again, the other piece to look at is licensing regulations. So if you are offered a postdoc, you know, that will help you get licensed, whereas if you end up in a faculty position, that makes it difficult for you to get licensed. Those are just some things to balance out. So it's not absolutely necessary to do a postdoc for a faculty position. Okay, well, we are about out of time, and let me see. Oh, we got a couple more. Let me see.
Can I answer this last question about other than assessment experience? So someone asked, Robin Hacker asked, other than assessment experience, what differences do you see between counseling and clinical applicants, and what are the general strengths and weaknesses? And I want to talk about a strength. You know, in the VA right now, we have a big focus on recovery, and that everyone can recover to their highest level regardless of what level they start at. And to me, that is a counseling psych value. You know, focusing on development, focusing on strength, you know, the positive aspects of things, that fits really well with the way we see the world in the VA, and it fits really well with if the VA is doing things right. And it fits really well with a lot of our particular jobs in health psychology, for example, or in our primary care mental health integration program. We hire a lot of counseling psychologists for that because it just fits perfectly with what they do, and we hire a fair number for all of our jobs, but I just think that's something that makes counseling psych stand out.
Thanks, Mike. And then there was a question from Mary Ann in terms of what you were referring to as a position 1. Is that just an entry level?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, Psych 1 is just an entry level position.
Okay, and then final question of the night. From Dominica, if an intern completes a VA internship in a state where post-internship supervision hours are not required to apply for and obtain licensure and obtains that licensure, could that person work in any VA in the U.S. on that license?
If you are licensed in any state or the District of Columbia, you can work in any VA.
Sweet. Well, on that very super positive note, I'd like to thank all of my wonderful colleagues here, Marianne, Mike, Eve, and Chris. Thank you for your outstanding contribution, your wisdom, and I wish the best of luck to all of our students who paid such close attention. Thank you all. Take care.
Take care.
Absolutely. Best of luck, y'all.